Welcome to another episode of AI&I. I am Michael Matias, and today we're going to be exploring the way that artificial intelligence plays a role in our ability to trust content at scale, and what strategies and techniques are we building in our world to be able to mitigate the potential risks of not being able to understand the context of what we are seeing and hearing. Today I'm with Paul Melcher, who is one of the world experts in provenance, authentication, and generative AI visuals. Paul has been working at the cutting edge of this industry over the last several years, really ever since the inception of generative content, much before it became commonplace. Paul has a deep understanding of the intricacies of this ecosystem, its limitations, but the potential. Today we will have an optimistic yet realistic conversation about the role that authentication, watermark, and provenance play in our ability to attach context to media. This conversation left me hopeful about the future that we're going into, about the energy and the effort that is being done to preserve context in what we're saying and to create new layers of trust. So thank you for joining me for this conversation, and let's welcome Paul. The evolution of what we've seen over the last few years, like over the last 5 years, what's been happening, and I think that you're also bringing a very optimistic approach, right, to this space.
I want to be, yes.
Why? So maybe starting with that. So where's your optimism coming in from? Because a lot of what people are talking about when it comes to everything that's happening with generative AI and digital media from an authentication perspective, it's quite dismal. But you do bring a certain level of optimism in the solutions in place.
It comes from the realization that there's no other option than being optimistic and trying to find solutions to it. So I see generative AI. My space is more still photography. So I see generative AI as being very close to the same type of revolution that painting went through when photography was discovered at the end of the 19th century. And so,
what happened there?
Well, so painters and painting in general was forced to redefine itself. Before it was everything. You did portraits, you did landscape, you did even with illustration. It was covering the news and everything like that. And when photography came out, then suddenly some limitations were created because now you had this tool to replicate reality much better than any painter could ever do. And so it stopped or limited painting and saying, basically taking that part of the painting process, the portraits or everything that was trying to mimic reality away from that tool and saying to the painters, you have to redefine yourself in such a way, which, and that's where my optimism has come from, is it forced them to become more creative. And the reason we have the Impressionists and the Fauvism and the Picasso and everybody that went further on is because once they were forced to move away from realism, they were forced into much more creativity and forced into doing something different than photography was doing. And to me, those are probably, at least they're my favorite schools of painting, is the Impressionist and everything that followed the Cubism and things like that. So photography is at the same stage today with generative AI and the fact that now you have machines that can replicate photography as well, if not sometimes better than what photography does. It forces photographers, the ones using light and lenses, to create content, to redefine what it means to be a photographer and what photography can do. So you cannot anymore do photography like you did and wake up in the morning and did like there was like 5 years ago. You have to rethink it. And so in the process, we're in this extraordinary moment of the evolution of photography where, it's gonna change, and the opportunities for it to change are tremendous. The same way as, if you were a painter when photography came out, you never saw that all these possibilities of impressionism or everything like were coming, right? It was something that evolved, and so the same ways. it's not clearly defined, even in my head, what photography is going to look like in 5 years, 10 years, 20 years from now, traditional photography. But it's going to evolve in a way that is certainly going to be very, very interesting.
But it sounds like the role of painters at that point was to move away from trying to depict reality, but to bring creativity and art into the painting. How do you think the transition for now photographers will be? Will it be that photographers they're probably not going to try to shy away from reality, right? But what is the role then you think that photography will play as generative AI takes a larger and larger portion of media?
So yeah, exactly that. They'll be forced back into reality, right? So we've taken. We've defined photography, the lens-based, light-based photography as a representation of reality because it captures what's going on, or reflection of the light
world.
in a certain way. So generative AI is what it is. It's generated, right? So it's not a representation or a capture of a moment in time. It is completely creative. You can mimic something that happened, but it's not something you capture. So photography will be pushed back into its limitation as a documentary tool to continue to represent reality or to witness reality with that. And generative AI, because of its possibility, will take over that creative part of photography, and you'll be. Or artists will be much more empowered or allowed to be much more creative using generative AI than photography would has ever allowed them to be. We've seen that a little bit when people created stuff with Photoshop, but now because of generative AI, it's becoming much easier and open to a wider audience.
Did we learn things about the behavior of the documenters versus the creators? If I take your analogy of the role of photographers versus those that are using, video, different editing tools, what did we learn from the last, 2 decades of using Photoshop and these types of tools that can help give us an indication of where we're heading?
What have we learned? We've learned a lot of things, I think. What we learn is the endless flexibility of photography or still photography in general, and it's basically created the groundwork for what will be done with generative AI in a much wider way. It's moving forward. I think those tools will be, ironically, probably less used by photographer because they will enter the realm of generative AI rather than traditional photography. Because if you want to alter reality, then there's nothing better than generative AI rather than taking a photo and then going to Photoshop.
So you almost see that there's going to be 2 streams of work. One which is let's try to stick as close to reality as possible, and the other one is saying if that's not our mission, then there's no reason to go that route because these tools are going to be probably
and to take some example, take sports or take wedding or take birthday parties, right? So you want your niece is having a birthday party. You're not going to generate a text prompt to do that on generative AI and say, "Oh, look at what I can create for a birthday party with."
Well, maybe if my phone battery died halfway,
but you'll take your phone, snap a picture. It can be good, it can be bad, it can be a little bit out of focus. Although with phones now it's impossible to do that. But what you want is capture reality, right? Same if it's a wedding or if you want to see photos of the latest soccer game or football. You want to see what happened. You don't want to see somebody's interpretation, even an AI interpretation of what happened, because that's something else, right? So photography, for that traditional photography, will refocus into that realm and saying, okay, we are the tool to continue to do that. And us as human beings will not drop photography because we need that relationship with reality that photography brings us. The thing is that we now live our lives in two areas. We live it in real life, and we have a digital life. And what allows us to move from back and forth from each in all comfort and somewhat security is photography. We take our real life in picture and we move it to our social media, we move it into our digital life, right? That's how we can move back and forth between our two lives seamlessly, thanks to photography, mostly thanks to photography, video, obviously a little bit in text. So for that purpose, traditional photography will continue to be that tool where we can exist in two realms at the same time. Generative AI will be that digital only part of our lives where we can create whatever we want from our existence, and we won't be able to take that into our real life unless if we start printing them and saying, "Oh, look at that," but. That's something else. So that's where they all fit in. Pretty much.
Absolutely. So you've spent a lot of your time, especially in recent years, in this context, right, in this real to digital and back to real landscape, and you've been at the forefront of the different technologies that are being used to ask this question and to help us navigate through these transitions. Let's go back to the basics for a second. Why is it important in your eyes that we have this distinction? Well, very fundamentally, why is it worth having groups like some of the groups that you're a part of and the companies that you're working with? Why is this in a live ecosystem that also should succeed, hopefully?
You mean about authenticity?
Well, authenticity and in regards to being able to distinguish the real versus the digitally created.
It's a fundamental part of who we are as human beings that we need to have reassurance about the reality of our world. That's how we make decisions when we know what's real, what's true, and what is not real, not true. That's how we can make decisions, and that's how we can put one foot in front of the other every day, and make sure that when we actually put that foot on the ground, there's a ground there, and it's not going to disappear. So we build this foundation. Reality or what we accept or as reality is what we need as a reference. And so,
have you ever had the experience of going down the stairs and you're occupied something with your mind, and then you're taking a step and you've actually reached the bottom, but something about your body, you almost feel like you feel like you're almost in a roller coaster, and something didn't translate well and it caught you by surprise that you're at the end? As we were thinking that, I was thinking back to that feeling of uncertainty that my mind is perceiving a certain reality and I'm confronted by a different one. That's a very scary split second.
Yes, and that's a good example. Although you should not be looking at your phone when you're going down the stairs.
Absolutely,
that's always dangerous. But yeah, absolutely. And so. With the advent of generative AI, what is going on because of the quality of reproduction of generative AI, where our minds cannot make the difference between a real photograph and a generated image, it's throwing a lot of confusion in our senses, and so we cannot rely anymore on seeing flaws. I know last year, or even sometimes still this year, generative AI will have maybe two fingers or something a little bit blurry that will be will give you hints that is not a real image. But moving forward, that's going to disappear very, very, very quickly. And the same with video and visual content. So in order for us to be able to continue to function, and again, back to what I was saying about the fact that we travel back from a digital life to real life back and forth using images as our reference points, we need to be able to make and distinguish the difference. Saying that if I see an image of an event that is happening across the world, that my only point of reference is that image, and I have to trust it to be what happened. So I can make decisions about my world and my environment. My visual cues are not enough anymore because of generative AI. So this is where tools like provenance identification, C2PA, and others are extremely relevant because it allows to make the difference between both. It's not making any judgment whether one is more valuable than the other. It's just making the point that you can make the difference between what is real and what is generated, and so we can continue to do process. Without those, stepping back, it's really interesting because we are. If you look at the history of mankind, photography is only about 150 years, not even. But in that short span of life of photography, we have integrated so much that we make decisions about our world based on that photography. Meaning that if you look at individuals when they lived in the 19th century, 18th century, 16th century, they didn't know what happened beyond their village, their front door. Maybe somebody would tell them something happened, far away, but that's all they knew about. We are constantly informed, and mostly visually, about stuff that's happening across the planet, if not across the universe, by the way. And we find it completely normal. And actually, we find it so normal that we spend our days making decisions about our daily life, and we incorporate that information into our daily life to make general, decisions about everything that we do.
A good example is the image of the Pentagon, right? There was the image of the Pentagon explosion, which within seconds caused the stock market to dip, right? So you can actually see measurably how fast an experience that's happening somewhere else around the world, potentially in another continent, is causing you to make real world decisions that are impacting everybody.
That is why it's critical to be able to make the difference. Is this is really happened? Did it not happen? And so you can make the right decision based on that. Yes, absolutely.
And I like the distinction that you made, that it's really not about drawing conclusions or judging which one is more valuable than the other. It's just a question of how do we continue to navigate between these two worlds in a context in which our visual cues and auditory cues are just not as powerful anymore.
Yeah, and it also comes back to, we also tend to credit traditional photography, lens-based photography, as an instrument of truth, and it's not, right? Since the beginning of photography, you were able to edit, manipulate the negatives, and there's many examples. I don't know if you know a lot about the history of photography, but there's famous story about the fairies, where this doctor took pictures of his backyard and then added fairies, and then people believed that he photographed actually fairies in this thing, and that comes all the way back to the beginning of photography, as well as manipulated this famous photos of Lenin and political activists erased afterwards because they were not in fashion anymore. So, anyways, it's always been part of photography. So, the fact, it's a recording of truth, but it's not so much a recording of truth because it can be altered, and it's part of the DNA of photography. We actually enjoy the fact that we can alter the image. We've all used photography, and we've all retouched things or cropped things out or retouched the lighting or things like that because it's you want to look at better. You want to make it to look better. So it's normal. However, what photography is a form of witness. It's the same way as you would be in a trial and somebody would explain to you what happened in that event. Photography is the same way. It's an image that gives an interpretation of what happened at that point of time.
In fact, I think digital media's video, audio, and images are now part of maybe 80% of court proceedings in litigations.
Right.
Because they are very effective representations of here is what happened at a certain point in reality. We don't have to just...
But it's still a witness point of view. It's not a fact. It's just somebody's interpretation or vision of things.
Absolutely. It's one angle, one perception. Absolutely.
And that's important to keep in mind because when you're dealing with identification of provenance, that's what you're aiming to do. So you're not saying that image or that video is true. What you're saying is that image or that video came from that person or that organization to you. And then you, the recipient, the consumer of that content, can then take an intelligent decision whether you're going to accept that as being true or not. Right? So same image or same event, if one is officially tagged, it says it comes from a photographer from the Associated Press, for example, and you can see that. there's a good chance that you will see, okay, I can trust that image.
Mm-hmm.
If another image comes and it's signed by the Department of Information of China or Russian or things like that, you would say, maybe I might not trust it as much, right? So the authentication process is giving you the provenance, up to you to decide if you're going to take that as being a true statement or if it's something that you're going to be
So you see that different stakeholders and different users will have different perspectives on what provenance needs to take place in order to consider this information as truthful or as valid.
Absolutely. Trust is human to humans, right? We don't trust machines. We trust the people driving the machines. Like you don't trust the airplane, you trust the pilot driving the airplane. You don't trust, the car. You trust the cab driver to not crash the car. So the same way as you tell me something, I might decide because you've lied to me many times before, whatever comes out of your mouth, I'm not going to believe it, or the opposite, right? So it's the same way with photography or visual content. The recipient makes a decision based on their knowledge of the provenance, whether they're going to accept that as truth or not. The provenance being always starting with a human being, right? Or an organization that is managed by a human being. But so that's where you create the link between the two, between the recipient and the originator of the content, so that the chain of trust can be created or it can be broken based on that. But you need that information to travel with that image or that video, so that you can make that decision. Without that information, all you have is an image or video. And you don't know if it was generated, you don't know if it was manipulated in some way, you don't know who took it, you don't know why they took it, things like that. And that's where it becomes problematic without that information.
So you're making a distinction of it's a two-part system. You have the foundational infrastructure, which is what do we know about this media? What do we know about the information, the context of the media, where it came from, who took it, who edited it, etc. And then it's a question of, given these pieces of information, can we trust it? Does this fit into our box thought model of what is truthful information or trusted sources or trusted information? Right?
Absolutely, yeah. That's the idea behind all this effort behind provenance and C2PA, content authenticity initiatives and related efforts in order again to preserve our ability to consume photography the way we've always done, traditional photography or generated photography, by the way.
Right.
But in a way where we know where it's coming from, therefore we can know what level of trust we can put into it and manage our information properly.
And so provenance is not an extremely new concept, but its implementation across digital media is relatively new. Walk me through a little bit about how this whole thing came to be and we'll get to where we are today as well.
So the initial thought was that just technology is not capable of keeping up with technology itself, meaning that if you try to create systems that automatically detect falsehood, somebody will figure out how the system works and then create new ways to create falsehoods. And it's just like a continuous chase, one after the other, and all that. So, the idea was to say, well, if you know who took an image or who is generated a file in general, it can be sound, it can be video, it can be, then you can understand the intent behind it. And if you get the intent, if there's you can figure out if there's an intent to deceive or to inform or what's the purpose, right? If I know you took a picture of your nephew's birthday, for example, and you share it with me, I'm going to know because it's you that you have no intent to deceive me. You just want to show you're proud of your nephew's birthday, So I'm going to that's what happened, right?
Sure.
So that's important. So, and that cannot be defeated by technology by knowing the provenance, the source of the provenance, or the person and the intent. And so that's the core foundation of the idea behind it. After that, it's all the technology in trying to attach that information to all the pieces of media that we consume and their different formats between video, sounds, and others to make sure that we have that information to be deciphered. Yeah.
And so when you actually uncover the growth of this industry, it had a special progression, I think, until now. I'm a little bit surprised every time I look at the progress we've made and how fast this is accelerated. I believe there was recently the meeting at Stanford, right, in December, around C2PA, Content Authenticity Initiative, and I believe in Hani Farid's closing remarks, he talked about how amazed he is at the pace of execution that this has come to life. Well, are you experiencing it the same way?
Yes, I'm yes, and that's why maybe I'm optimistic as well. So one thing about the symposium, we were all surprised how many people showed up because before that, we were never regrouped into one place, and so it was just.
This was the first time that.
It was the first time.
Really?
And
because C2PA has been around for a while, right?
It's been around for 4 years. Well, the the Content Authenticity Initiative has been around for 4 years. The C2PA for 3, I think. But it's a very short time for creating a format like that or trying to do that. And what was exciting about it is that in the same room you had the New York Times, you had Microsoft, you had Google, and then you had also startups. That they just opened up 2 or 3 weeks ago, or maybe longer than a month or two. So you had, but the same synergy and the same intent of trying to get this solved, and this to become a standard for everybody to use widely with the same level of energy, whether you're talking to the New York Times or smaller companies, and that was really heartwarming. But the pace is, yes, absolutely. There's an urgency, right? There's now more computer generated or generative images out there than there's been real images created since the beginning of photography. So in the last 2 years, we've created more images than there were real images created before. Yes, so we're already getting flooded by false images. Google search, image search results, when you type in things, Google currently does not have a mechanism to differentiate between real images and fake images. So you could be typing something like Ukraine war, and the top images that you see in the results, some of them could be generated by AI, never happened, right? Because Google Image doesn't have the tool to discriminate. You would not know if it's placed in a website that looks, legitimately news or things like that. I think the number is there's about 40 elections this year going on worldwide, and over 1 billion people about to vote. So, just putting that in perspective, that people are making those decisions on who they're going to vote for based on, like we said before, on information they receive about the world. That is through photography mainly that they see online, whether it's social media or the articles that they read or things like that, then the potential for real serious damage to our societies is huge, right? If you cannot make proper decisions, you cannot vote properly. If you cannot vote properly, it's the end of democracies. If it's the end of democracies, it could be the end of our societies in general, right? So the stakes are huge. It's really a civilization,
right?
Life-changing civilization aspect of it. So there's that urgency on the people that realize that to implement that and make that happen, because they realize this is now. This needs to happen now, not in 2 years or 5 years. So we don't have the time.
And so what's the current state of affairs? Where are we at? Are we ready to enact this solution at large scale? We're talking about 40 elections this year. You're always saying generative AI, there's more generative AI content than there is authentic content. From here, I imagine that the gap will just widen exponentially fast. I think it was a Europol that estimated that experts from the Europol that by 2026, more than 90% of content online will be AI generated. sounds like maybe we're going to reach that faster.
Probably faster, yes.
By the way, which is quite astonishing, I have to say, when we started Clarity a year and a half ago, that statistic came a few months after we started Clarity. And we had that, and that used to be something that I would share when I was meeting people. And back then, people were not necessarily thinking about the space of acceleration. And time and time again, the reaction that I got was, no way. There's no way that by 2026, 9 out of 10 reels on TikTok or on Instagram will be AI generated. And now we're sitting here and saying, well, it's actually probably going to be faster.
Yeah.
And I'm on the camp of faster.
No, definitely. And that's we're talking still images. We've seen example of what will happen with video with glimpse of Sora from OpenAI. That's coming very soon as well. Where
faster than we think.
Make your text to video tools that anybody can generate videos that looks like the real thing very, very quickly. Before the end of this year, which is going to accelerate the.
Not just Sora, we have a whole ecosystem of startups raising huge amounts of capital in order to accelerate and meet the market demand, which is endless because it fits into a disruption of every vertical, right? So it's coming.
So that's where the emergency comes from.
Yeah.
But where we at, Google, Meta, some of the biggest companies in the world, OpenAI actually, and Stability as well, have signed on. And OpenAI currently, DALL-E 3, generates what is called a manifest, which is that metadata information about the origin of the file. So you can see that it was generated by DALL-E 3. So DALL-E 3 being used by Bing, Microsoft search engine as well, and all the Bing tools that Microsoft is. All the Microsoft tools that are using the DALL-E 3 also have that metadata information contained in it as well. So it's starting to spread. It's starting to be implemented. It's starting to be accepted. There's still a lot of work to be done. There's a lot of education to be done. So the first part is getting all these social media, search engines, publishers to display and show that information. The second part, which is going to take a longer time, is the education of the audience and the public out there saying, what is this? How does this work? What do I do with this? So that when they encounter that information, they can use it, properly.
So effectively, what does this mean? So we have all these large companies that are, let's say, the content distributors, right? Some of them are also creators, but they're also distributors. So when they join this coalition, when they sign on to this effort, what effectively does that mean?
So there's two parts. Is the creators. So the creator part, which embeds that manifest information about who they are and not who they are, but what they created. So that is inscribed
or edited, right? Because some of them are just manipulating parts
all the chain of and all the chain in between, and then the publishers which display that content, whether it's social media, whether it's news media, whether it's a website or anything like that, that can display that content, which contains a little icon which just says CR for content credentials, which you can click on and see the history of that file, the provenance, source, as well as, like you said, if there's been any edits and what kind of edits have happened through the life of the image, so that you can see whether an edit was critical and changing the information in that file, or whether it's simple, alteration that didn't change at least the source, the core information of that file and nothing else. So that, again, the consumer at the end can make an educated decision whether to trust that file or not.
But going back to the distinction that there's one aspect of, okay, let's capture the information, let's get all these different parameters and all these different signals of what means for this media, or where it came from, who touched it, who's seen it, which devices it came from. And then there's a question of, can I trust it? And the distinction you made before is that there is a difference. It's not a universal agreement on, can I trust this media? So how do you envision this educational piece now, or this consumer piece of how do we then bring this information to the public, to different stakeholders? What does that look like?
So the most common analogy is your food labeling on when you buy food, right? So on boxes of your cereals or whatever you buy, or pasta or something like that, you have a description of what elements, what kind of items are contained in the food, right? It's up to you to decide if you're going to eat it or not, right? Nobody says, it doesn't even say actually if it's dangerous items, which it should, but that's something else. It doesn't say if it's dangerous, the chemicals they might put on some of the foods or things. But it gives you a label, and you're able to do your research to find out which elements are dangerous, which elements are good for you, and things like that. And you eat what you want, or what you can afford, depending on cases. But so that's the same process, right? So the education part is about explaining what this labeling is and what it's about. It's not about telling people who to trust or what to trust, because that's an individual choice. No one can be in a position, unless it's a fascist country or authoritarian dictatorship of some kind, to tell you what to trust or not to trust, and saying this is true or not. This remains an individual's prerogative or choice based on their moral education, whatever is influencing their decisions. So that's not the role of that tool. And I think, and where a lot of us think, that should not be the role of any tool to do that.
And it sounds like there are certain, if we continue with the food labeling analogy, there are certain agreements in society on which labels are better for you and which labels are not as trustworthy or not as healthy, right? And I'm thinking of high trans fat label. I think there is some agreement that if there's a high trans fat label, it's probably going to be damaging to my health.
That changes all the time. I mean, I remember that milk was good for you, milk is not good for you, milk is good for you. So again, that's it's kind of about the same thing, maybe with provenance. It's a dangerous game to try to set in stone, because also our moral value changes. As a society, what we accept as being okay at one time changes over time, and say, well, that's not okay anymore. So trying to force upon an idea of what's true or not is extremely dangerous. In my perspective, not something that anybody should have the right to do. Education is the best, to me, is the best thing.
And so on the consumer and public level, I think that makes a lot of sense. If we look at it now from an enterprise perspective, so if we think about the other stakeholders that are taking in digital media, that are enjoying provenance, and they need to be able to authenticate the media coming in, or to ask the question of, can I trust this media that's entering now? Do you think there are some universal, I guess, signals for whether, if we look at from a security perspective even, I'm assuming that there will be some consolidations taking place there.
Yeah. So, and this is a very interesting point that you raised, because we tend to talk about provenance and these questions of trust and authenticity only about the news aspect of things.
Sure.
But it is pretty much as important, if not more important, in our financial life or commercial life, when we decide to buy products, for example. So we live in a time where no company can do business without visual content. They need to create photos of their product or services, videos, and on top of that, continuously communicate about the brand values, going to, whether you're selling cars, shoes, or yoga classes, or you need to create video content. Now comes generative AI, whereby people can't make the difference whether those photos are actually coming from your company or somebody else is making fake copies. So you're a Nike, and I don't want to hit on Nike on particularly, but I'll use that as an example. And you create your sneakers, and you sell the sneakers. You create photos of your product, which are disseminated through e-commerce stores and things like that. Anybody today actually can generate a new pair of sneakers. Actually, if you look and type Nike, online, there's a lot of fake ones that were generated by AI. And then somebody could use that and say, you can buy those. And then you enter your credit card, you buy it, and you never get anything, right? Because it never ships. That's detrimental. I mean, obviously for the consumer, it's detrimental for Nike also, because people say, "Oh, yeah, Nike, we can't trust anything."
Absolutely.
So Nike needs to create a ground truth of their product images, so that there's a reference library where people can come back and say, "Is that image the real image? Is that generated or created by Nike?" In the case of products like that, that's fundamental for the existence of Nike. But that's only a sub part of it, right? So provenance, C2PA, yes, but we're talking about trust. In this way, it can be automated in so much that you find or discover or Google image search, discover or index an image of a Nike shoe. You could have via API or other systems a link back to the Nike database of images, the ground truth image, and checking whether that image is actually from Nike or not. If there's a match, yes. If there's no match, suspicious, and Google image search could flag that and saying, careful, this is not, verified by Nike. So that, yes. But again, it takes for the consumer to trust Nike as a brand to want to buy that. But we can go for the second part, which is extremely also important, and you touched upon it when you're talking about the Pentagon photographs or fake photographs. Is public companies like Nike or Coca-Cola or others. So they communicate about their executives doing different things, their CEO traveling or making speeches or doing things. So now it becomes easy to take one of these photos and manipulate it with using generative or create a new one of the CEO of Nike, and maybe putting him in a very problematic surrounding, like around naked boys or something, like young boys, and publish that on social media. It's a public company. It would take minutes before the value of the company would start dipping extremely fast, because it's like, oh, suddenly, this is wrong, right? And then even if Nike came back and said, well, this is a fake photo, everybody would say, of course, Nike is going to say it's a photo. It's their CEO. They're not going to say, oh, yes, that's what he does in his spare time, right? So there, too, it is extremely important for Nike to be able to control and manage what images of them circulate, and being able to have tools for people to differentiate whether this is a real marketing, communication, photo, video, or other, or if it doesn't contain that stamp of authenticity from Nike, then there's a good chance somebody else is trying to manipulate people's opinions. So yes.
And how aware do you feel is the market today from the company's perspectives, the large platforms, the Nikes of the world? How active and vibrant is the conversation around the urgency for the solution and the willingness to adopt it? Do you see today, maybe in comparison to a few years ago, but also in comparison to what you would expect yourself as somebody who's thinking about how do we actually strive towards a better infrastructure for us?
It's active in the technical world. The tech companies are the first ones to be realizing that it's a necessity and the urgency of it. Like Google, for example, or others, Meta. I've seen that. It's also active in the news space, where publishers and creators of news realize that is essential for them to continue their business. They won't be able to continue if people don't trust them anymore, or there's no difference between what they produce and what comes out of generative AI. So they need that part. It is not yet really seen in the corporate world or the brand side that we were just talking about. It's starting. Some companies are peeking their ears out or heads out and say, oh, maybe this affects us too in some ways. But it's still very much very quiet in that space.
It's also a little bit still the calm before the storm, right? I think we're yet to see some really monumental earthquakes
right. So absolutely, what you need is one event that will trigger everybody's reactions and say, oh, we need to do something. Like the Nike example I gave
Absolutely.
you. Hopefully that won't happen, but something like that, where all the other companies will say, we need to do something before it happens to us. So yes, probably that's the scenario. But one thing to keep in mind is that, and that's a problem, or something that needs to be solved, is that there's no financial for Nike or on the commercial side. There's a financial value to doing something like that. But when you're dealing in the news space, there's a moral obligation, but there's no financial value. But by that I mean, if tomorrow the New York Times turns on this ability to show you on images the provenance of the images, they become C2P or content credential compliant, they will not be able to charge you more money because of that, right?
Why not?
Because consumers or people reading the New York Times, they say, why am I paying more, to have this certification? That's something that, I should have when I buy the New York Times. The back end, it's going to cost money for the New York Times to implement that, right?
Why? Why does it cost money?
You need to, develop the applications that are going to support that kind of display of information in the back end. And so that's where the biggest resistance comes from, is saying it's going to cost money to implement. It's not going to bring us more revenue. It's not going to bring the New York Times more readers, or Washington Post, or Fox News, or whatever. However, it's going to cost us money to implement. When you look at, in this conversation I have almost daily with newswires, AP or Reuters or Getty Images, they spend a lot of time and money, having photographers shoot the news and get that disseminated and sold to publications worldwide. It's the same thing. It's like, it's going to cost us money to implement that and add that to our workflow, but we won't be able to sell those pictures for more money to these publications because they're not going to say, well, it's not worth it. So there is both a moral understanding that this needs to happen, but there's a commercial barrier in saying, well, it's going to cost money and there's no immediate monetary reward for that, and the return on investment is moral for the moment and not commercial, and that's the barrier.
Is there a way to turn that around? Are there opportunities to monetize authenticity and the content credentials and the transparency?
Eventually, I think so, over time, because I'm maybe being optimistic about it, or
this is an optimistic table.
That consumers will want to be able to trust the source of information and go out and seek that label, the same way as if you had a box of cereal today which had no food label on it, you would probably not buy it because it's suspicious. And I'm not going to eat something I don't know what's in there, although I don't know, most cereal is probably not good for you anyways, but the same way as you go and look for places where you can get your news, where you have this content label, so you can have and make the right decision saying, well, I trust these guys and things. So eventually people will be willing to pay an extra or a subscription or something like that because they realize the value into having that kind of certified news type of thing.
But in your perspective, there is a question mark at the end of the optimistic expectation. You're not sure when that'll happen.
Yes and no, because the other force in play is legislation, right? So in Europe, you see it in the European Union. They're passing laws quickly where they're demanding that at least generative AI content be identifiable by everyone, right? So that maybe not the news pictures, but if you can identify one group of images, then you can identify the other, right? So if all images generated by AI has some kind of identification that you can define, then you realize if there's no identification, then it must be a real image, right? So already this splits into so. Those laws are being put into the books in the European Union. There's a good chance that the United States, actually, there's been an executive order from the President Biden about the federal agencies being required to identify when they're using generative AI content, whether it's photos or text or audio or videos, clearly identify it so that the relationship with us, the citizens of United States, if and when they're using it, we can clearly see that they've been using that. Again, it's not a bad thing to use generative AI. So the idea is not to block for people from doing it, but to allow people to make the difference. So it's already, it's an executive order right now. It should, to my opinion, and a lot of our people' opinion, should be turned into a law. We know the politics in this country can take some time to be applied, but that's what's going to happen before the commercial value happens. It's going to be forced upon a lot of these places to implement it by legislation, because there's 40 elections coming this year and more after that, right? And so the politics behind there realize, oh, this might be good for me, but that's also could be bad for me as well. So even the political class realize that this is not something they can just let happen and not do anything about.
Right. Now, is C2PA and provenance, is that a silver bullet solution? Is that the solution that works always, or are there limitations to this process?
There's no silver bullet. So no, it's not. So C2PA, or the content credentials, is metadata. So it's data that's associated to files, and that traditionally can be erased or separated from its file. And once that's separated, then it's gone. So it has its.
So the media is effectively, it links to some manifest that's remote, and you can erase that link.
You can sever that link. Yes.
Sever that link.
So no, it's not perfect. So once that's done, obviously, then you lose all information, and it's not secure. So there's others, or there's technologies that can work in conjunction with that, or other type of technology that are stronger depending on the use case. So that's one possibility. There's ways to reinforce what they call soft binding of the metadata to the file with using watermarks, for example, invisible watermarks that can be read and reunite the data with the metadata with the file.
Like Imatag, right?
Like a company like Imatag does that, yes. And then there's still the technology side, which allows to be more profound in the sense that it can reach or discover alterations of files in a technical way, even if it's always a cat and mouse issue. It's still efficient in the sense that it will find a lot of places where the metadata is not strong enough, or the watermarking is not survived. So a combination of the three, even with other solutions can work, but there's no silver bullet.
So the three that you're pointing out to is the manifest work itself. Let's make sure that we trace the alterations from the creation to the distribution. Soft binding, watermarks of. Let's make sure that we keep some evidence of what this media is, even if it's trying to be manipulated, and we can trace it back to some manifest, right? Mm-hmm. And then there's the question of, can we run some downstream analysis on the media so that even without the context of the metadata and the manifest, we can still identify potential alterations that were not recorded in the other solution, which is not bulletproof.
Absolutely. So metadata can be erased or separated. Watermark can fail sometimes depending on the alterations of the file.
Absolutely.
And the technology there can come in and see. We were talking about this professor in Stanford that you know very well, and you're going to help
Dan Bonnet. Yeah.
And so working on a lot of technical solutions in discovering deep fakes and fake content based on a variety of solutions as well. And so, we're talking previously the fact that I forget the numbers. There's 10 billion generative AI images circulating in the world right now with no metadata, no watermarks of any kind. So all those, for example, the only way to discover them would be to use a solution, a technical solution to be able to trace it.
You mean detection?
And even if C2PA is a standard of all places and watermark, it will never be everywhere. And so This tool needs to complement everything. And then there's others. This works for visual content, so videos and photos. You have also sound, obviously, and then text, whereby these elements don't work anymore or as well as with visual content, and you need to find other solutions.
And so what happens with audio? Because we've talked a lot about the visuals and the pixels, and is audio working the same way from a provenance perspective?
So the intent behind it is the same. So I'm not an expert in audio, so that's I can't go very much in details with that. But the idea behind it is the same as far as the C2PA approach is,
sure.
right? Where is that going to work as well as that with visual content? That's the question. We'll see. But I can't say more about that because I'm not an expert in audio files and the way they work. So
absolutely. And so, if we look down the line, where do you think we'll be, let's say, a year from now? Paint me, your picture of the world, of where, let's say from a consumer perspective.
From a consumer perspective?
Yeah.
A year from now?
Yeah.
Boy, this I hate predictions because this moves so fast.
Yeah.
Much faster than
well, so that whatever prediction you make, it'll be faster than that.
Yeah, pretty much. Well, for one thing, I mean, we'll see text to videos, generative AI, very advanced, probably still recognizable because of flaws here and there in some places, but coming very close. Especially on longer formats. If it's the smaller formats, the 10 seconds or less, I think that's going to be surprisingly efficient. Photos, we won't be able to make the difference with our eyes with any kind of generative AI or not. That will be already gone into the realms. And then sound, I mean, just from what I see, sound is already way ahead of everything, where we can replicate voices and music is already in that space, and then text, obviously, which is also very much advanced. On the provenance side, it's more hopeful. I think we'll start. It's moving rather quickly. I think we'll see publications, maybe major publication, adopt the C2PA or content provenance and by the end of this summer, and starting to spread slowly, mostly obviously in Western European spaces and North American publication. And
when you say adopt, it means that they'll start to showcase the content credentials.
You'll be able
to the audience.
To see that. Where I'm very optimistic is Sony, Canon, Leica, all the big camera manufacturers are implementing that inside the camera. So that information will be captured at the moment of capture of the image.
So the new generation of cameras will already include that.
So allowing to start from the beginning and having that information to travel from things. So that's going to help enormously the progress of that standard. And I think, after Google and others, obviously other companies will start adopting it because it's going to just, and looking forward probably to places like the European Union to start asking for the implementation of it and offering subventions to or grants to publications or places, because that's more like the way to do it. And that would skip the commercial barrier we were talking about before in helping companies and publishers implement it via subvention. I think we're going to be in a better place in a year from now as far as provenance information and authenticity is concerned. Definitely a better place, but we will not be there as far as, everything's good, we can just relax and enjoy everything. There'll still be more challenges and probably things that I haven't thought about yet that will surprise us again.
And obviously, a lot of the work that we talked about today is is more from coming from foundations and open source and nonprofits, but there is a private ecosystem that it thrives within. Yes. So we did go back and forth into the question of the commercial applications and where is going to be the financial incentives, and I think we're all aligned that we want to introduce financial incentives because it accelerates the adoption of these technologies, right? How do you see the big opportunities here from commercial aspects, let's say for startups in this context? So what are the areas in which startups can really thrive over the next few years when it comes to this question of content authenticity?
There's two immediate that come to mind. First, like we were talking, e-commerce or any type, that's one very clear aspect where all companies will need a way to protect their content and clearly make the differentiation between what is real and what is invented. But also in the scientific world, right? And when I'm talking about scientific, think about the pharmaceutical world, for example, which spends huge amount of money in research, and they transfer information via photos, videos to others for certifications, for verifications, for numerous reasons. The potential for bad actors to come in there and do some damage is huge. It's bigger almost than messing around with elections, I think, because that could affect medications and things like that. And those businesses like pharmaceutical companies, international, can be seriously damaged by fake information or manipulated information. They used a lot, all their scientific presentation, sell things are photographs, right, or representation. So you add the possibility to create deep fakes with those and manipulate them, and you can. The damage could be really big. So these companies, having such big stake in it, will, the same way as they are protected against any entry into their system, and I think cybersecurity is your background, so you know more about that. The same way they need to create those same barriers around their visual content and their scientific content to make sure that they have the ground truth in one place, and as well as when this stuff travels, if and when it does get manipulated, it can be identified immediately so that it's stopped there before it can make real damage. So that's definitely, and then obviously military. I can't imagine the headaches of military across the world that depends so much on satellite imagery and other type of drones and video footage and as well as still footage. If you can hack those and show them something different than what is really happening, right?
Absolutely.
So they need also a way to figure out, what they're getting is the real information, and that's something that is manipulated.
Absolutely. Paul, to end on a light note, I remain very, very optimistic, not just on the ability for us to implement these solutions commercially and to get them ultimately to both to consumers, and I do have a certain level of hope and expectation that we will sort of come back to our senses that the value of trust and truth does matter on a very fundamental level, especially, and I think it'll depend a lot on the quality of the products that are coming from the market, how easy they are to use, and how integrated they are into our ecosystem. But what I'm really excited about is that, I grew up with a laptop, and I grew up with the phone in my hand, and I grew up into social media. And I grew up constantly hearing about misinformation and fake information, and that it's almost like an unbeatable challenge, and it's impossible to fight in a coherent way. And what it feels to me over the last 2-3 years is almost that there is this collective effort to rebuild a new infrastructure which never existed before, and there were never the market incentives to build. And this new infrastructure can potentially lay the foundations for a world in which a lot of the traditional misinformation we've had will hopefully be debunked through this new infrastructure. And so I do envision a world in a few years in which we will create new standards for the information we see online, both in real time and offline, attributed with provenance, with detection tools, with watermarks. And that will create a new expectation of what information do we trust and not trust. And I think that may also go back and I think we may end up in a much better world and a much better internet environment than the one we were in even 10 years ago, before we had generative AI. And so I'm kind of hopeful that if we look at the trend, we have a strong dip now, and that's the urgency that you're talking about, the 40 elections, the 3 billion people voting, but I think that hopefully we'll end up in a much higher altitude.
You're more optimistic than I am, but yeah, I really hope so. Yes.
Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you.
Thank you.